Podcast is brought to you by Head Start Basketball.
Hey Hoopheads, wanted to take a minute to shout out our partners and friends at Dr. Dish Basketball. We've had their partnership manager and training specialist Jefferson Mason and marketing manager Nick Bartlett on the show in the past, and we couldn't be more excited about what they're doing for the game of basketball. Their Dr. Dish shooting machines are undoubtedly the most advanced and user-friendly machines on the market and truly accelerate skill development faster than ever. Beyond efficient reps, Dr. Dish provides training expertise and versatility designed to develop complete players. The new Dr. Dish CT machine has further revolutionized basketball training with over 150 plus on-demand individual and team workouts from some of the best coaches and trainers in the game. These workouts include video instruction and combine game-like shooting drills with ball handling, conditioning, and agility drills. Along with workouts, the Dr. Dish training management system also provides stat tracking and analytics to track progress and ensure accountability. These are just a few reasons why top programs like Duke, North Carolina, Louisville, Florida, Baylor, and countless others are upgrading to Dr. Dish. Learn more at drdishbasketball.com. Follow their incredible content at Dr. Dish B-Ball on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. And make sure you mention the Hoopheads podcast to get $300 off your next Dr. Dish purchase. That's a great deal, Hoopheads. Get out and get your Dr. Dish shooting machine today.
How does LeBron do it? I'll tell you what, he puts $1 million of his salary into his body. You know what I mean? He's like, I'm not going down like these guys. I've been to a Cavs practice, and I can't speak on LeBron fully, but that guy's there first. He's there last. He's doing all those right things. That's how he has longevity, and that's how he's also top of the crop when it comes to basketball.
Dennis Cuturic is in his second full season with the Robert Morris University men's basketball program as Director of Basketball Performance. In his role with the Colonials, Cuturic oversees all strength and conditioning of the RMU basketball student-athletes, as well as guidance in proper nutrition and sleep patterns. Cuturic joined the RMU staff after spending 7 years in the same capacity at Duquesne. While with the Dukes, he developed and implemented year-round physical and mental performance training for both the men's and women's programs. He helped coordinate and schedule nutrition education throughout the season. Prior to joining the Duquesne staff, Cuturic served as an assistant strength and conditioning coach with Cleveland State during the 2009-2010 season. In his role with the Vikings, Cuturic assisted and developed programs for men's and women's basketball, softball, volleyball, men's and women's tennis, and men's and women's golf. He oversaw and supervised all weight room training, including Olympic weightlifting techniques, plyometrics, power, speed, agility, and functional assessment, while also assisting in nutrition education. If you have a chance to leave us a 5-star rating and review on your favorite podcast app, we would really appreciate it. Tell your friends in the coaching community about the show and make sure you're subscribed so you never miss an episode. Check out hoopheadspod.com where you can listen to every episode we've ever recorded and find out more about what drives our show. Grab a pen and paper so you can take some notes as you listen to this episode with Dennis Cuturic, Director of Basketball Performance at Robert Morris University. Hello and welcome to the Hoopheads podcast. It's Mike Klinzing here with my co-host Jason Sunkel. And tonight we are pleased to welcome to the podcast my longtime friend, Dennis Cuturic, the Director of Basketball Performance at Robert Morris University. Dennis, welcome.
Hey, thanks. I appreciate it.
We are excited to have you on the show. We've been kind of chasing this for a little while, but wanted to have you on to talk about the performance side of basketball, learn a little bit more about your basketball journey, and then dig into some of the things that you've been able to do in your career, and then maybe wrap up with some advice that you might have for players out there who are trying to improve their athleticism in order to improve their performance out on the court. But let's start by going back to when you were a kid and how you got into the game when you were young. What made you fall in love with basketball?
Probably being the littlest guy in my neighborhood for 3-on-3 tournaments in my driveway. I was a little guy, so I was probably about 5 years old, and I had two older brothers. One was 3.5 years older, so he was 8.5. and then the other one was about 10, and then all their friends would come over from the neighborhood, and they'd play 3-on-3 while I'd be sitting out waiting to get in on a game if I was lucky enough. And if there weren't enough guys, guess who got picked to go in and who was ecstatic to be in, but also a little chippy because I was just like chomping at the bit to get on in there and play with these big guys and not sit down in the and be an observer.
But you had to be there as an observer in order to get picked in the game, because if there was a spot open and you weren't there, man, you were missing out.
Yeah, I wasn't going inside the house for anything.
I totally understand. It's funny that you talk about, playing with your older brothers and their friends who are obviously also older than you. And I think that's one of the things that I think I put it out. I don't know. I think I shared it on Facebook that it was a quote from Bob Huggins talking about how players today, one of the things that hurts their skill development is the fact that they don't ever really play against players who are older than them. Growing up in today's basketball system, you play AAU basketball, you're in fourth grade, you play against other fourth graders. You're in sixth grade, you play against other sixth graders. And you never get that experience like what you described with, being a 5-year-old or being a 6-year-old and trying to compete with 9 and 10-year-olds toughens you up pretty fast.
Oh, it sure does. It sure does. I think that's what kind of has given me a little bit of a chip on my shoulder. And you've known me for a good amount of time, and I can't help it, but I just have a chip on my shoulder since I was a little guy. And, all those guys are like, you get the last guy to get picked. And, after, you can react a couple different ways, right? You can be mad about it, or you can just say like, all right, I'm fine with it. It doesn't really bother me. Like, let it just roll off your back. But, I got picked on a lot by my 2 older brothers and had nicknames and, so they kind of, they kind of fed that fire, and I probably wouldn't be where I'm at if it wasn't for those 2 guys that juiced me up every single day to draw more out of me than I thought I could have drawn out.
Yeah, I think there's probably a connection between being the last born and being a successful athlete, because you're always chasing and you're always getting beat up. And those are 2 things that when you think about how we develop as athletes, when you're trying to keep up and you're trying to extend yourself maybe a little bit beyond what your comfort zone would have been as an 8-year-old. And then you think about just people pushing you around and beating you up and making you a little bit tougher. I think that, if you went through and were able to do some kind of longitudinal study of athletes, I think you'd find probably that the last born, especially in a situation like yours where you have multiple older brothers, I think that youngest brother typically tends to get beat up a lot and tries to keep up a lot. But ultimately, I think that it ends up helping them as an athlete because of just, again, you have to do all that work in order to try to keep up with your own siblings right in your own house.
Oh yeah, it was a constant battle in every sport that we had in our neighborhood: soccer, baseball, football. I'll never forget, even in those days. So we would have team baseball, like our neighborhood baseball game, and I want to say it was the Expos versus the Dodgers, and we had white T-shirts and we drew on them, and everyone had their numbers, and they put their names on the back of the, I think it was Tim Raines was one of the players. Base stealer, for the Expos.
Who are the Expos, man? Hold on a second.
Coach Jason's just a little younger than us.
No, wait, hold on. I know who the Expos are. I know.
Good work.
It's where the Nationals came from. But
you only know that from Super 70s Sports.
No. I know Raul Mondesi, man. Come on.
Okay. You're in this mix.
All right, you're there. Right. My team, Dennis, in backyard baseball was the '79 Orioles. That went against the We Are Family Pittsburgh Pirates. So I was always the Astros. John Lowenstein and Ken Singletary and Kiko Garcia was their shortstop. So that was my team back when I was playing backyard baseball. Which, speaking of that, when's the last time you personally drove by a baseball field and saw a ragtag group of kids playing a pickup baseball game?
You know what? That is very, very true. I do not see that. Even in the field I'm in now, strength conditioning, basketball performance, a lot of coaches are against playing outside. They're like, it's bad for your knees. And, there's so many different scenarios that I've come across. And, people tell you, hey, we've seen this forever and they never change. And, that's what's been a blessing for me is I've been around so many great coaches that they've been willing to challenge it and say like, why do you believe that? And then if you don't believe it, well, do your research, dig up some things. And I started digging up things on, guys would say, you don't want to do too much jumping with basketball players. They jump enough and, it's going to hurt them. Or, I think the Russians had this mentality and methodology of training that if you couldn't squat 2.5 times your body weight, you shouldn't be doing a lot of jumping. And, I remember talking with some guys, I'm like, don't kids run and jump all day long and then like come back for it the next day for another 10 hours and then play like, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
so you have to really decipher and like, you have to be willing to question these things and not be afraid, to be humbled sometimes. And then other times, hey, you might see the truth coming out in a different way.
All right. So as a basketball performance coach, you just described how when you were a kid, you're playing multiple sports all the time as a young kid. So from your perspective, talk about the value, especially at young ages, let's say elementary school through middle school for sure. Talk about the value of being a multi-sport athlete in your experience as a basketball performance coach.
I just think I always felt like the best as I've gotten older and seen multiple sports, and I've coached some really, really great athletes. But I felt like the best athletes on this planet were basketball players. That just maybe I'm a little biased to one degree, but seeing a soccer player and then seeing him play basketball, you could tell that he was a soccer player.
Right. You
watch a football player and he plays basketball, more often than not, you can tell that guy's a football player right there, and it's interesting. But I also think that if you incorporate basketball, because basketball, you're utilizing your body in many different dimensions, right? It's called like a 3-dimensional world. And like soccer, you're doing more running, right? Like you run really long distances. You're not doing a lot of short change of direction. And then you got football where it's more short change of direction. And then if you do anything more than 5 yards, like people look a little, unorthodox, right? You can tell the linebacker that's out there playing basketball. But basketball, you have to run in a straight line 90 feet. And then you might have to like backpedal. And then you might have to, you're doing that over a greater area. And I see that basketball players, I've noticed, I remember before I got into this field, I would think that I could tell that guy would be a good basketball player. This guy wouldn't, and just seeing like their foot movement, body coordination. I think soccer helps you. I remember watching as a kid Olajuwon in the 94, 95, the years that Jordan was out of the NBA, and Olajuwon, who had an extensive experience playing soccer growing up. And you watch that guy's footwork and then look at it now. He was 7'1". I don't see many guys move like that anymore. Yeah, KD can do some of that, but I still think Olajuwon with that pivot, and you of all people would understand this. Like, you're one of the best jump stop pivot guys I've ever come across.
Hey, Taco Fall's good at doing that. Didn't you see him play the other day?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you think about, honestly, Dennis, you think about Olajuwon, and the game has obviously changed, and we don't have nearly the amount of guys playing down in the low post where he was doing most of his damage. But at the same time, I just think that his footwork in at that time was second to none, and he was just incredible. And you look at some of the highlights and go back and watch the things that he was able to do with his feet. And now there's a guy who I don't think he picked up a basketball, if I'm not mistaken. I think he was maybe 16 when he first picked up a ball. And within 5 years, he was the number 1 pick in the NBA draft. And it's just an incredible story. But it speaks to, again, I think the value of being a multi-sport athlete. And I always go back to, for me, one of the things that I find to be interesting is that, you described your childhood of being out in your neighborhood and playing soccer and playing baseball and playing football and playing pickup basketball and all these different things. And not only, I'm sure, were you doing that, but you were also riding your bike and you were climbing trees and you were jumping over fences and doing all kinds of things that today kids don't do those things. And to me, that was a great way of developing a kid's athleticism. Now, we didn't think of it that way. It wasn't like my dad sent me out into the neighborhood and said, hey, you're going to go out there and become a better athlete today. No, it was I was just out running around and playing. But today, kids don't do that. And I think that's why we've seen the explosion of sort of the strength and conditioning market for young kids, whether, again, no matter what the sport they're in, because I think in a lot of ways that's replaced just being out in the neighborhood running around, where I think that's where a lot of kids that are in from our era develop that athleticism. And obviously it wasn't as structured of an environment and all those things, and there wasn't the scientific knowledge behind it like what you're talking about. But I still believe that helped me to become a better athlete. I'm sure it helped you become a better athlete as well.
Oh, 100%. Like, you made me just reminisce a little bit. Like, I remember jumping over like streams and stuff. Like, all right, can you jump over that stream right there? I bet you can't. I can't. And then you would jump, and then, all right, you can do it. All right, I want to see if who can go further. And then you go back, and then, like, it makes you think about like all those, like, they were just fun, competitive things. Just, parents weren't involved.
Right.
I mean, so you were left to your own device, and to go back a little bit to the comparisons of playing multi-sport, like now everyone's saying, when you're a young kid, like, all right, that football guy, he's a lineman at age 7. Well, that's why he doesn't develop, because you think he's only a lineman. And the best lineman, I'll never forget, I went to go watch the Browns, a practice and a strength conditioning workout. I had been in touch with one of their strength coaches, reached out, and he let me come on in, and Joe Thomas is over there training. And I'm watching them do the ladders. So the ladders that are on the ground, they lay flat. There's about 10 squares. They're by about 14, 15 inches by 15 inches and then connected together. And I'm watching him go through like a karaoke and then moving quick feet in there. He looks like a dang wide receiver. He's 6'6", 300 something pounds. And I'm like, wow. Look. And then like I'm hearing stories about, you should see this guy drop step and like just like hammer down on somebody, because he's
heard that
Cleveland
story.
State
I've heard that story before.
Yeah, so I'm not the only one. So there's a lot of truth to it. So I think that there's a lot. I don't think, I know. And right now we currently have a basketball player that's only been playing basketball since his sophomore year. He's in his junior season of college. He's been playing soccer his whole life. He has great footwork, man. Is he just a natural on the basketball court? And he's a phenomenal athlete. And he can just pick up a basketball. Like, you can see he's raw. He doesn't have all those refined passing skills, but he can still make those plays, and he can run up and down with anybody.
Yeah, it's amazing when you see somebody who's that gifted and who's performed well in other sports that can then transfer that to whether it's basketball or transfer it to some other sport. And I just think that, we've stumped for this on the podcast a whole bunch of times, but the need for especially younger kids to be playing multiple sports, it just pains me when you see a kid who's 7 or 8 years old and they're playing club soccer 12 months a year, or they're playing club basketball 12 months a year, and that's all they do. Because one, you have the inability to develop those other athletic skills that the other sports may be better at developing. So there's that. Then I'm sure you could speak to the threat of and the risk of injury from overuse when you're doing something 12 months out of the year. And then I think almost equally as important as all that is the mental fatigue of doing the same thing 12 months of the year. There's very, very few kids who are, let's say, ages 8 to 16 who are singularly focused on just one thing, that's all that they want to do, regardless of whether it's a sport, an instrument, something at school, just a hobby, whatever. Most kids want to be doing multiple things. They want to do what you and I talked about 5 minutes ago, which is one time they want to be jumping over the stream, the next they want to be playing 3-on-3 basketball, then they want to come in and draw a picture, and then they want to go and do this. And I just think when we force, as adults, when we force these kids into sports specialization, that we're doing them a tremendous disservice, and not just a disservice to them as an athlete, but also just to their complete development of the whole child as well.
You're 100% spot on. And I see it in college a lot. And that burnt out mentality, it's pretty rampant. It's crazy. And then the injuries that you're talking about, my head coach that I work for is phenomenal. He's super, super bright, wise, educated. Like he played at Penn, and like he just got this. He has a Rolodex of information, and his memory is crazy. And I'm always learning from him, and he's challenging me. And the injury, anytime he comes across anything sports performance wise, he shoots me a text like, "Hey, what do you think about this?" Or "I saw this. This is," and he has two young ones as well. So we're always talking about, hey, what's the best way to develop? And we've talked about it numerous times, but you can see now if you look at the studies, the surgeries of ACLs and overuse and things of that nature, like basketball now that they're playing AAU, they're getting surgeries. It used to be like ACLs weren't until you were like in college, and then it started going back to like sophomores in high school. It's down to like seventh and eighth and even sixth graders. I want to say the youngest person they performed an ACL on was like 12 or 13 years old. I mean, can you imagine that? A 12, 13-year-old already turned their ACL. God created our bodies to be flexible, bendable, resilient. Like you don't hear too many kids, like they might break a bone because they fell out of a tree 20 feet high. You know what I mean?
Right.
They're not breaking a bone when they kick somebody else until you get to the NBA and your bones are already hard and developed and finished growing. And then there's a lack of maybe nutrients or training or whatever that is, or something funky happened. But I'm seeing that, and I read this study, and ESPN had a really. I'll shoot you the link from ESPN, but it's unheard of. The AAU games, they said they're playing like 70 games over the summer, so from 10 to say what 17.
Yeah, I mean, if you're on that summer circuit and you're on a quote, and I'm going to use this term very roughly, if you're on an elite team, which doesn't necessarily mean elite in terms of your skill, because everybody claims that their team is elite, which really doesn't, which really means nobody is elite. But regardless, if you're on that particular circuit and you're out and you're playing all spring from the time your scholastic season ends until, it's time to go back to school. Yeah. I mean, you're easily playing 70 games, and that can't be good. I mean, look at what the NBA is doing in terms of load management and having a better understanding of how to control for the load and the fatigue that guys go throughout the season. And I'm sure that is a huge difference from the time when I played basketball in college to now, in terms of coaches monitoring and understanding what their players' workload is, and then trying to manage that to maximize what they're going to be like on game day, where you really need their performance to be at its highest. I can think back to my own experience where there was no consideration of, was my team tired? Were players tired? Was I tired? Were we fatigued? No. Practice on 2 days before a game was 3 hours. Practice the day before a game was an hour and a half, and there was no adjustment based on anything. It was just, that's the way it was. And so now, I'm sure you can speak to that, how different it is in terms of monitoring the players' conditioning and that kind of thing.
I'd be willing to look at, and we both love basketball so much. Think about all the years since maybe, I don't know, I graduated high school in 95. So probably right around then, a little bit later, I'd say 2000s. Look from, we have a guru that does all of our data analytics. He's a sophomore, I believe, in college, and he wants to be one of those data analytics guys for an NBA team. Super sharp kid, and I've asked him to put it together. He's working on it right now. But how many lottery picks have had not just an injury, but like they call it a soft tissue injury, which is like preventable.
Right.
All right. And then those ACLs, and then those different types like Jones fractures, or Ilgauskas, like his foot fracture. Like there's a lot to be said for how underprepared these guys are going, because if you think they're younger and younger, right?
Right.
And like I see like a Julius Randle, like look at that guy, it looks like a beast, but that's all genetic. I mean, there's a lot of genetics. Maybe he works really hard, I don't doubt it, but like you shouldn't be getting injured that often. I mean, how does LeBron do it? I'll tell you what, he puts $1 million of his salary into his body. You know what I mean? He's like, I'm not going down like these guys, and I've been to a Cavs practice, and I can't speak on LeBron fully, but that guy's there first, he's there last, he's doing all those right things. That's how he has longevity, and that's how he's also, top of the crop when it comes to basketball.
There's no doubt. I think that he's maintained his body better than anybody, and I'm sure there's some genetic gifts in there as well. But regardless, he's put in the time, he's put in the effort, he's put in the money, like you described, to maximize what he can get out of his body. And I always compare and contrast that. Again, thinking back in time, you go back to the 1950s, and these guys, game ends, and they're drinking beer and smoking cigarettes literally in the locker room.
Oh yeah,
following a game, and then you move on and you get up to the time of Bird and Magic, and you had early 80s still where guys were like, I don't know if we should be lifting weights. Like you look at the NBA players in the late 60s, early 70s. You watch highlights of those games, and you look at their bodies. And they looked, and I'm just going to be facetious here, they looked like me. They're 6'3", skinny dudes that have no muscle size. They just look frail. And then you compare them to the athletes that we have today, and you're just blown away by the difference in the physicality of these guys. And again, a lot of it goes back to, we understand a lot more now about what drives good performance, whether that's the training methods that we have, whether it's nutrition, whether it's understanding more about the need for rest and recovery, and all those things. Just, we have so much more knowledge to help players to understand that. And yet, I'm sure you can speak to this. How difficult is it at your various stops to always convince players that they need to do those things?
It's really challenging. It depends too. It takes a while to buy in, because like you said, they've been playing AAU for so long. So what do they do in AAU? Are they refining their passing, their jump stop? Are they are they working on their jump shot? Are they working on being good teammates, running good offense, setting a good screen? How about playing good defense? Like, they don't work on that. I haven't seen that, because a majority, when I'm saying majority, it has to be greater than 50%. And I would be willing to even go way higher than that, but I'm just going to do that for this conversation's sake, is that these players just play basketball in the summer, and they're just worried about offense and scoring and getting the ball in the hoop. However that is, it doesn't matter, that they're going to find a way to get the ball in the hole, and that's all they're concerned with.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that's happened with the AAU culture, is definitely it's become more of a game that's based around your own individual, not even necessarily individual accomplishments, but just what are my individual goals in the game. When I'm in an AAU game, I'm trying to show out so that some college scout or some NBA scout will notice me, and therefore I can advance my own career. I'm not necessarily looking to advance the one-loss record of my team. And I think that trickles down sometimes from the AAU system into high school basketball. And, we've talked to a lot of high school coaches that, are very careful about the types of AAU programs that they send their kids to, because they want them to be with a group that's going to do things the right way, and that's going to focus on more than just their individual opportunity to showcase themselves to college coaches. And I think that's something that's definitely a challenge, and it's going to continue to be a challenge. I'm not sure what the answers are to those problems. I know maybe we've talked with some of the high school and college coaches about giving more of the control over the recruiting process back to the high school coaches. Like, you'll appreciate this, Dennis. We talked to Tony DeCesar, who's the head coach at Solon, and he had a player who was recruited that ended up, he blew out his knee when he was a junior, and he had been a big time recruit. And he went to Duquesne. So
yeah, I know you're talking Sincere
right.
Carey. Yep,
right.
I've heard of him.
And so Sincere Carey was recruited by a Division II school, signed with that Division II school before he ended up getting released and went to Duquesne. And the coach from that Division II school and Coach DeCesar from Solon never spoke once. They never met each other, never had a conversation. And he signed to go to that school without no contact between the high school coach and the college coach. That, to me, like, when he told me that, I was blown away. I was flabbergasted. And yet you see how important the summer basketball circuit has become in the recruiting circles. Head Start Basketball, along with members of the J. Billis Skills Camp staff, will be hosting the very first Prime Skills Camp. an affiliate of the Jay Billis Skills Camp that is held annually in Charlotte, North Carolina. Prime Skills Camp will take place on the campus of Western Reserve Academy, just outside of Cleveland, Ohio, June 26th through the 28th, and will be designed for boys rising to grades 6 through 9. Prime Skills Camp will mirror the Jay Billis Skills Camp in daily programming, teaching, coach-to-camper ratio, and quality of instruction. Prime Skills Camp brings all of the team-oriented individual instruction, focus on the fundamentals, and high-level coaching to young men aspiring to a high school varsity basketball experience. This camp is operated by Billis Camp veterans and includes the Jay Billis Coaches Development Program alongside the camp, ensuring that the quality of teaching and coaching at this camp is second to none. Please visit headstartbasketball.com or jbilliscamp.com for more information or to get registered.
We do so much research and background and connections. Like our coaching staff, we really recruit the Northeast, so New York, Jersey, Pennsylvania, DC metro area and whatnot, Virginia. And, I'll never forget when I came in my interview. I've been at my school here now for 2 full years, so I'm on my 3rd season. But I remember coming in for the interview and, we're talking to the guys and rather the assistant coaches. So we had some assistant coaches at Power 5 schools, A-10 and whatnot there. And one of them played at Pitt. And then when I was at Duquesne, they ended up, we would play Pitt. And I remember playing against him. And so now here he is as an assistant. I mean, not playing. I'm sorry. Let me go back. Not playing against him personally. Our
Correct.
team
Understood.
was playing, right?
Understood.
Understood.
Understood. You weren't suiting up as a 38-year-old.
Correct.
All right.
Thanks,
All
man.
right.
I wasn't suiting up, man.
Even though you would have wanted to, right?
Oh, every time I get on, what? That's what brings me close to the game is being around these guys. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, it is awesome. So we played against them, and a couple of the players that are on my team played overseas, and they were friends with this young man. And so coach did his due diligence and asked him, hey, can you dig out on some of these guys? And so he's literally calling these guys up in Europe and asking them, hey, what do you know about Coach Dennis? And they're like, he's wild, man. Like, you know what? He's like, you can't play with Coach D. Like, I didn't know. I mean, I had these guys for like 2 years because it was still early on in my career at Duquesne. So I wasn't sure what they were going to say, because when I came in there, the culture was a lot different than what I had envisioned for it. And I came in there and guys, they weren't, as open to getting better as I'd like them to be. And, for me, it's all about getting uncomfortable and, heading on adversity. And luckily enough, that I wasn't even thinking about what they would be saying about me down the road. I just think about today, this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to do it. This is who we are. And that's the only thing I know. And this is how we're going to go get it. And those guys, you know what, they spoke like that about me. And my coach was actually looking for someone just like that. And, that's what kind of digging they did. So, it worked out to my advantage. And I never thought, it would work like that.
Yeah, it's crazy.
But you never know.
No, and I think, nowadays it's clearly much easier to be able to do that due diligence. I'm sure it's easier to find people who can vouch for or speak, about the people that you're trying to look into, whether that's hiring a new assistant coach or whether that's looking to recruit a player or whatever the case may be. I think it's easier than ever to look at someone's social media. I mean, you see so many stories about this player who put something on social media and this coach says, yeah, I saw that. And immediately I just decided I'm not, I don't want that player around. I'm going a different direction. And I'm sure that stuff happens, unfortunately, all the time. And it's another good lesson for any players who are out there listening. What you put on social media doesn't go away, and people are looking. It's not like coaches don't look at that stuff. They do. And you put yourself in a bad position if you're putting things on there that you'd be embarrassed for a coach or a parent or someone who might have a decision to make about your future. If they're going to see it and you're going to be embarrassed by it, then it's probably not a good idea to put it on there.
Yeah, most coaches are not going to go ahead and put their neck on the line for that when it's already open.
No, absolutely
That's
not.
what I knew. Because now all of a sudden, it's just like I tell my kids every single day, like, all right, my last name's Cuturic. I'm Croatian. So I always tell them, like, in the Croatian way, you're a Cututric. That's how we say our name. I go, hey, you're representing the Cututric today when you leave the house. Do your best and be a leader, and that's what I'm telling them. And then so now, a coach, he doesn't want to be, I don't know, Player Johnson's coach because, like, hey, man, that has nothing to do with me or my program. They
Right. I
don't
don't want to
they
be.
don't
I don't
want
want
that
to be associated.
association.
For sure. Absolutely. There's no question about that. All right, let's jump backwards.
Okay.
That was a good tangent. That was a solid tangent we just pulled off right there. So
I'm
let's
the
go
best
back.
at that.
That was good, man. I loved it. Let's go backwards to when you were a kid and when basketball started to become your favorite sport, when you decided to start maybe focusing a little bit more on the game of basketball at the expense of some other things.
Basketball got really big for me. Probably I was fifth grade, sixth grade, so about 12 years old. My cousin lived in the inner city of Cleveland, and I used to go out there and visit. And on his street was, there's a lot of stuff going on in the early 80s there. And, you just kind of had to steer away from some of these certain streets or side streets and alleys. And, but we'd always go to the rec center, which was Kavasic Park right there. And they had, the metal rims with the metal nets, the chain nets. And I remember coming up there and it was like, guys as old as like 30, 35 years old up there. Some of them, that are former college players that, hey, after college, they didn't do anything. Some of them just got out of jail, but I remember like going up there and we had a little crew from my cousin's street in the neighborhood. There were a bunch of Croatian guys and they knew each other and, some 6'5", and, we go up there and I was probably one of the little guys, but like, I remember like I just had to be able to handle the ball. Like, hey, listen, your job is to handle ball. Don't turn it over. Like you're already being prepped on your walk up to the park, right?
Right.
And I would go stay at my cousin's house. I would ask my mom. I was like, Mom, can I stay here for the week? And she's like, you can't stay at your cousin's house for a week. What are you like? Are you crazy? She's not gonna take. And I would ask my aunt. I would say, hey, is it all right if I stay over for the week? Like I want to stay over.
It's awesome.
And we would go literally every day. Up there. I mean, I still see her when I come back to Cleveland, and she's still got the same. She'll bring out the same food and whatnot as we were kids, and it just brings back reminiscing memories. It's really bad where she lives right now. I mean, my uncle has a shotgun and a baseball bat behind his front door still.
That's not good. That's not good.
No, not good. But like that neighborhood, man, it really developed me. I think it developed me to understand like you're nowhere near one of the best players. And like, if you want to be, you're gonna have to put work in. You got pushed around, and if you lost, you were out for like a couple hours. You didn't want to lose. And it's like, playing like we did as kids and going to another local park or to that indoor gym that was open. You knew you wanted to stay on. And I learned that at that age. It really drew me. I had a little bit of success. Like I'd make a wide open jumper and I was like, okay, they're like, hey man, that was a big shot, like from the little guy, and they encouraged me, right? Like, but they also got on me too sometimes. And we had a good mix of guys. And I was thinking about some things and I'm like, I was just telling my college athletes the past couple of days, I was like, you know what? I got on my kids and I was like, no one was encouraging each other. They were just doing the work. No one said a word. It was as quiet as a mouse. We're in a 4,500 capacity gym, and you can't hear anything besides like just their heavy breathing. And I'm like thinking like, this is ridiculous. I go, hey, what's going on? No one says anything. I go, are you serious? Like this is your family right here, and like you can't throw one encouragement bomb to somebody else or encourage them or dap them on the rear end or give them a 5 like for working hard while you're doing this. Because what we do is we get in our own minds and we just become selfish and we're like, wow, what I'm doing is really tough. Forget everybody else. I'm worried about me just getting through this. And I started getting on them. I go, you know what? I go, last time I saw someone open a bank, all right, they have to put deposits into that bank in order to make money. If you don't put any deposits in and you just take out, you become bankrupt and there's nothing left. and we become bankrupt, like everything's wiped out. And then they started looking at each other and they started thinking again. I was like, it's up to you if you want to put any money in the bank. I put money, I go every day, I put money in the bank on you kids. There's no doubt in my mind, I'm not going to put it on you. And I know you just happened to bring this out of me right now, is like thinking back to when I was a kid and like someone just encouraged me 1 or 2 times. You know, that's all I needed. Like to say like, okay, I can play in this game.
So true. And I think that's something to remember, that any coach, if we really think about it, we know it, but sometimes you forget that it doesn't take much to have a huge impact on a kid. We can all, I'm sure, go back through our playing careers, our time as a child, and think about something that someone said to us. It might be our parent, it might have been a coach that we found to be encouraging, inspiring, or maybe something that made us angry that we still carry with us, that drove us. And I think every athlete has that. And it's important to remember that as a coach, that everything that you say may not always be remembered, but somebody may remember something. And I'm sure that you've had it happen to you, and I know I've had it happen to me. You'll have a player come back to you and say, hey, do you remember when you said such and such to me? And that really drove me because of whatever the reason might have been. And there's nothing better than that as a coach. And conversely, me as an athlete, I can think of things that coaches said to me that I still remember to this day. And I'm sure that if I went back and shared, hey, do you remember when you said this to 20-year-old Mike? Or do you remember when you said this to 13-year-old Mike? I'm sure they would say no, they have no recollection of that. Mm-hmm. And yet I carry that with me. And it's something that drove me throughout my playing career, throughout my coaching career. And some of those things continue to drive me even today. And the people who said them have no recollection of ever having said them. And I think that's important to remember as a coach.
Yeah, you know, I got in this field to give back, and there's a time where I thought, you know, it was probably about 3, 4, 5 years ago, probably about 4.5 years ago. I wasn't sure if I wanted to do this anymore. I wasn't sure, you know, I don't know what kind of change or difference or what type of impact. And, you know, I don't want to do this job to get a pat on my back. I love seeing kids like get better every single day from the routine of what they do. And that's where their confidence comes from. And to see someone from year 1 to year 2 to year 2 to their senior year, they should never be the same person they were from year 1 to year 2 and the year 4. But when I had this, you know, this thought on my mind, it was just, you know, it was a lot of my family. You know, we travel a lot in this field. You know, sometimes you're not, you know, making a ton of money, maybe, you know, and then just like the constant, like the wear and tear, you're not home. And when you have a family, you know, those things are, you know, you have to figure out what's most important to you as a man, and, you know, what do you want to do about it?
So how'd you work? So how'd you work through that? Because I know that we've talked to a ton of coaches, and I think that at work-life, for lack of a better term, work-life balance is something that is getting more and more challenging for coaches at all levels. And I always say that if you go back 20 or 30 years ago, the baseline amount of time you had to put in, I'm going to use it at a high school level, but the base amount of time you had to put in as a high school coach was far, far less than the base amount that you have to put in today if you just want to reach an average level of success. That's to say nothing if you want to be the best of the best, excuse me, that the amount of time that you have to put in order to do that. And so I think that that's something that all coaches struggle with. So maybe if you wouldn't mind, just share kind of how you worked through that process, or what your thinking was at the time when you were trying to make that decision.
Well, you know, I went to, I was coaching, so I did men's and women's basketball, and then we had a transition, and I ended up working with some tennis, some track kids, and some other sports along the way. And one of the tennis guys, you know, he was going through a hard time, and, you know, we would just talk about our faith, and he just wanted to sit down in my office a couple of times. And sure, you know, you make time. If I have time, you know what, I'll do it with anybody. You know, sometimes people just need an ear, you know. And So we talked, and then a couple months later went by. He was like, yeah, thanks for talking to me. And then another couple months went by. He was getting ready to graduate. He's like, hey, we're having this Bible study. He's like, would you mind coming? I said, sure. He goes, oh, and by the way, you're going to speak too. I said, what? I go, I don't know if you guys want to hear me speak. I'm not the most eloquent speaker, and I'm a little rough around the edges. He's like, no, you'd be great, man. He's like, would you mind coming? I go, sure, I'll come. So I come there, and I didn't realize, but I have like probably about 8 of my former student athletes in this group and current. And so I just tell them kind of like how you and I are just talking here in this phone call, and just about my background, where I came from, whatnot. And then one of the kids got up and says, yeah, can I say something? I said, sure. Like, I don't mean to interrupt, but like, there's this time that like, I wanted to quit. I hated you, but like, you pointed at something like in my cross, and you called me out and you said, like, what are you doing today? Like, what are you doing different today than you did yesterday? Like, you wear that, like, I said something to that effect to her, and she's like, I never forgot that. And she's like, you put a chip on my shoulder, and she's like, I decided like, I'm never going to give up for anything. And then like another girl stood up, and she's like, she was on a treadmill one day, and I wrote her a note while she was running on the treadmill. She wasn't even my athlete at the time. And I just put it on there. I said, you can give up now, or you can give up later. You choose it or something. Sometimes you don't even think,
you don't
just
even
see
remember.
A kid going through something. Like, I know you're going through a tough time, but it's short-lived. You know what? Like, get the job done. Like, I know you can do it. And whatever I wrote to her, it was like 2 years prior to that. And she's like, I still have it taped in my locker. And then like, so all these kids came out, like, I kid you not. And I was just like floored. I was like, man, like, I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. I felt this is my calling. But at the same time, like, so that happened, and I was like, I was rejuvenated, and I was, I was really excited about getting back to work. And, no matter what, my goal is to give 100%. Nothing more, nothing less. My gas tank has a 15-gallon tank. I can't put 16 gallons in there. People say 110%. Whoever wants to use whatever type of like wording they want to use. I just try to keep it simple. Like, I make them think a little bit with what I'm saying, hopefully. And I just say 100% every single day. And that has never changed. And good things have come from it. And I've been able to have great conversations with kids, and they've been able to at least allow me to, earn their trust. I don't ask anybody, just give me their trust or their respect. Just allow me to earn it. All right. You don't have to give it to me today, but give me a chance. And good things have happened through that. And, going back to like the work family thing, I thought about going in another career path, and I'm like, well, I know what my calling is. My calling is to help kids, athletes, use that as an avenue to, see how great life really is. And the challenges are going to be there. And when you experience it through sport and with a family and friends, like, it's such a greater experience.
It really is. Sports brings out something that I think is very, very difficult to replicate in any other walk of life, simply from the amount of time that you spend with the people who are a part of your team, whether that's you're an athlete with your teammates or whether you're the coaching staff, and the amount of time that everybody spends together. And then just the experiences themselves are so intense and so, especially in the moment, so important to you. And, maybe you look back and you say, my career, and it was this, it was that. But in the moment, there's nothing more important than that game, than that game that's in front of you. You can look back to 2 or 3 years, 2 or 3 years ago in your career or whatever, and say, yeah, that game and this. But when that game was right there in front of you and you were enmeshed in it, there's nothing more important. I mean, it takes over your entire life if you're like 90% of the athletes who care to the greatest degree. There are obviously some that don't meet that standard, but for most of us, it becomes very, very important. And so as a result of that, it gets very easy to get caught up in that and sort of leave the other pieces of your life to the side. And I know for a long time when I was a kid, I look back and I wouldn't trade the way that I was when I was a kid, but certainly to the extent that I lived my life was centered around the game of basketball. And I excluded lots of other things and probably lots of other people as a result of my desire to become the best basketball player that I possibly could. And you think about that now on the coaching side of it, and I know how wrapped up any coach gets in the results of a game. And it's so different. I always equate it to working with my own kids. When I'm coaching one of my kids' teams and we lose, I'm replaying that game in my head for as many hours as there are until the next game. And that result stays with me. And conversely, if I'm watching one of my kids play a game and I'm just a parent and I'm sitting in the stands, 10 seconds after that game is over, I've put it behind me. I mean, I want them to win. I want them to be successful. I hope they play really well. But if they don't and their team loses, 10 seconds after that, I'm fine. But when you're a coach, it doesn't work that way. You can't turn that off. And I think that's where you get into the challenge of, it goes back to, and I think what you shared in the story about the Bible study and going and hearing those kids talk about things that maybe you didn't even remember. I think what that got you back to, and what drives a lot of coaches, is getting back to your why. And why am I doing this? And now those stories that you shared about those girls talking to you about what you had said to them and how it continued to inspire them and drove them to be better, that's an example of what someone's why is, an example of what your why is. And as a result, you're then able to understand how you can get that balance that you need in your life, where you can continue to have the impact that you have as a coach and continue to be there for your family. And it's tough. I mean, we all know it's tough. And I think that, you know, things sometimes do get out of whack and they do get out of balance, and you just have to keep circling back to what's important in my life and what's my why. And if you do that, you realize the importance of both pieces. You realize the importance of what you do as a coach and the impact you have. And then, of course, you realize your impact as a husband, a father, a brother, whatever the case may be, a son. You realize how important all that stuff is. And I think that's something that all coaches go through for sure.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, there's just such great demands, and you want to see these kids become great. Like I said, I was telling my kids today, like, I'll never deny you help if you ask, you know, outside of what we do regularly. And there's so much time that comes from that, right? Like, you want to see, and then, like, now I also want to be a man of integrity. Like, for me, that's one of my, like, top priorities in life, outside of, you know, my faith, my wife, my family, and then integrity. I look at that, and, like, if I'm telling a kid, like, hey, be the best man you can be, like, make sure you respect people, like, but you got to spend time with, you know, your loved ones. And here I am spending all my time at work. Well, then I'm not holding up my end of the bargain. And I don't know, you know, and I have to, like, self-check. But, you know, a couple good pieces of advice is move really close to work. So that way you don't spend a lot of time driving.
True.
Because that's one of the things I used to drive. I only lived about 10 miles from work, but it took me about anywhere from, on a really good day, like on a late game, I could get home in 18 minutes. But in traffic, it could be like 50. You know, and there were a lot of times that I would come in, you know, I would have to leave the house early at 6 a.m. My wife's like, why are you leaving at 6? You don't have a group till like 8. Well, I was like, well, if I leave at 6, I can get there like 6:30. I can, you know, get stuff ready, get on my computer, get some stuff out of the way. But if I leave at like 7, I'm cutting it close and I could be late, you know? So
Totally.
Now there's more time away from home. So now I live 3 miles from work, and I'll tell you what, it's been phenomenal. And not only that, is I work for a really good coach that not only, like, gets it, but, like, my one son he just turned 5. I bring him to work, you know, pretty regularly. All the players know him. You know, my oldest son could come to work probably once every couple of weeks. You know, my daughter, sometimes, like, my wife has to go to work, I have to bring all 3. And my coach says, you know what, bring them. Don't worry about it. Like, bring them. I don't care. Like, you got to spend time with them, find a way. Like, don't ever think you can never bring them. And when he told me that, like, he meant it, because his kids come too sometimes to work. And now, like, my kids not only get the experience of hanging out with me, but they get to see what a great work ethic is about, and then which ones are embodying that and which ones aren't, and then talking to different people and, you know, seeing what, like, some of these kids, like, are really, really great individuals, you know, and some of these kids are not so good, but when they get around kids, man, like, they can become someone different. And you're like, wow, I never saw the side of somebody. And there's so many positives that have come out of this. My past 2 years have probably been two of my best. We haven't won a championship, but all the other stuff, like it is about winning championships, but all that stuff in between is so much more important. You're not going to win every single game that you're ever going to play. So what are you going to do outside of that?
I think the ability to incorporate your family into your team family is a really important thing that helps to achieve that work-life balance that we were talking about.
Huge.
Where you can bring your family around, and you think about, the coach's wife, or you think about the coach's family and their kids, and just what you described, the relationship between a coach's kid and the players on the team, and how important that is. And that goes back to what we talked about right off the top with recruiting. And if I'm a coach and I do have young kids that are going to be around the program, I got to recruit kids that I want my kids to be around. I want to have people who have high character to be part of my team, because I know that my wife's going to spend time around them. And so I think that's something that is really important for a coach who has a family, to be able to not have a complete separation of here's my work and here's my family. The more you can integrate the two and bring them together, it allows you to spend time with both groups in ways that maybe you couldn't if you kept them separate. And I think that's a tribute, to your head coach, Coach Toole, that he's able to do that, because I think it makes a big difference.
He's made it so easy. I mean, my kids even meet like recruits. They're there sometimes, and we're over here. And you know what? Parents of recruits, they love seeing it, because they really do believe that it is a family. And
right.
I've noticed a lot of young kids, and throughout all these AAU, because they know people. I mean, I don't want to talk bad about AAU, but whatever programs they're with, like, they're just trying to get them some showings or to show their talent. Like, they're not buying into the kid, and the kids know, so they don't trust many people. And they all say, hey, I want somewhere where I can be like, feel a part of something, feel like a family, and it's like, my kids are here, and they're like, man, this is pretty cool. They start shooting the breeze with my kids, it's hilarious.
It's awesome.
Yeah, it actually breaks the ice pretty good.
That's very cool. Very cool. All right, let's jump backwards again.
All right.
And give us one or two of your favorite memories from playing high school basketball. One or two things that stand out for you that you still remember, that you carry with you even to this day.
Oh man, I think Coach Pop and Coach Schmook would remember this one. There was a game, I want to say, we were playing, I think, Aurora, and it was probably one of my better games. And I think I had 15 or 18 or something in the first half, and one of our other players on the team was like, yo, we got to pass me the ball, and this person already averaged 20 points a game, so someone else was, I was the assist guy. I did whatever it took, whatever it took to win was my goal.
Right.
And I don't know if this was the same individual's goal as well, but he was worried about that. And I can remember, some words ensuing back and forth, and Schmook just just looking at both of us like what is going on? Like, can we just play basketball? And some other things happen, and then we took the team down to the wire. I think they were like a top 10, a ranked team in the state at that time, and we were doing pretty good that year. And unfortunately, on the last second shot, to go into over end of regulation, I missed like a 8-foot jumper on the baseline. Man, I was pretty ticked off. And then we went to overtime and lost by 1. So that was a memorable time. I think another time was Schmook made us. We were being goofballs on the sideline and through practice. One of those days where you're being a kid and
right.
Everything's funny, right?
Yep.
Who knows what reason? You and your buddies are just being typical, immature, 16-year-old kids. And next thing you know, you're on the line. You run 10 suicides. You run your first, and you're doing them all in 30, 32. And
right.
And then you get that off till a minute, and then you're on back. I don't know how many we must have gotten 10 to 15 of them, and then that was it. Like, he didn't even say anything. He just walked off the court, and we were like, we were like, all right, I guess we're done with practice today. We were just so happy. We laid there for the next, 20, 30 minutes, just gathering ourselves together and picking ourselves off the floor.
That's funny. Well, those were in the days. So full disclosure here, Dennis graduated from the school where I coached and where I continue to teach in the same school district. Dennis graduated the spring of the year when I got hired in the fall. So the head coach, Phil Schmuck, who is now at Twinsburg, was Dennis's high school coach. And then I worked as his assistant for, 11 or 12 years as his varsity assistant. So a lot of these stories ring very true and very, very close to home for me. And I always think back, Dennis, we were talking about load management. And I remember the first couple of years of coaching out at Richmond, where we'd have like a 3.5 hour practice. And then Coach Schmuck, Coach Pop, and I would sit in the coach's office for another hour, hour and a half, and just hang out and talk shop and whatever. And you just think about, I can't imagine that after the third hour that we were getting very much value out of our out of our high school athletes. You're at hour 3 of practice with a 16-year-old high school kid. I can't imagine that you're really accomplishing very much at that point. And you kind of think back to those days, and just that was a lot more prevalent back then. But it's just interesting to hear the different perspectives of how things were back in the day.
No, he was awesome. He was a great coach. He always challenged you, and I needed it. He was tough on you, and he was like, calling you out to elevate your game, and it would get chippy in there, and like, but he ran the show. He did a really good job of it, and I mean, it was really fun. It was probably some of the best best coaching I've been around as a player.
I agree. He's one of the best coaches that I've ever had the opportunity to be around. And I always would say, whenever people would ask me about him, I always would say that, look, we don't lose to teams that we're supposed to beat. And quite often we end up beating teams that just on paper look like they'd be better than us. And to me, there's no better endorsement of a coach than that shows me that you're getting the maximum, if not more, out of the talent that you have on the floor. And I always thought that Phil was able to do that. And there's lots of guys like yourself that swear by him as former players, and for reasons that are very clear. Anybody who's been around him, I told him this all the time, that I felt privileged to be able to work underneath him, because I learned a lot as a coach, and it was a lot of fun back in that time when I was young and single and didn't have to worry about work-life balance. Work was life.
Yeah.
Work was
That's
life.
right. And all those pickup games afterwards too.
For sure. Yeah, no doubt. It's amazing. It's just, and it's hard to believe how long ago, when you start looking back and thinking about those times, that it's been 25 years since I got there to Richmond. And so it's crazy.
Let me ask you this. Do you know anyone that still plays 2-on-2 full court?
Not besides Coach Schmuck.
That's how you get in shape, buddy.
That's right. There's no doubt. There's no doubt about that. There's no doubt about that. I maybe did that when I was a high school and college athlete, but I certainly didn't want to do that when I was 28. There's no doubt about that. No question.
Coaches, check out these new offerings from Tyler Whitcomb basketball coaching courses. The Brad Brownell Clemson Playbook and Baker Dunleavy Quinnipiac Playbook are now available. These two coaches are among the most respected tacticians in the country. Visit coachtube.com/users/Tyler Whitcomb to check out these great resources.
Let's talk about your experience playing basketball overseas. Talk about how it came to pass, and then we'll talk a little bit about just what it was like being over in Croatia and getting an opportunity to play some professional basketball.
Well, so after high school, I know that I was looking at some schools to play at. There are some couple of Division II schools and a bunch of Division III, and I wasn't really set on that. Obviously we always have an inflated self-image, right? And that was probably my level, but I believed that I was better than that, and Schmook is really good at, helping you believe some things too. And he's like, you're better than that. You could, like, come on, like, I'm just telling him no. Like, I remember a couple of schools came to watch a couple of games, and he's like, they're here. I was like, he's like, I told him, like, you're gonna go do something else, like, and I was like, all right, so, he gave me a pretty good recommendation in that regard, and so I believed I could do more. So I was looking at a couple of MAC schools to attend, and Bowling Green was the one that I really liked, and some of my friends were going there. I thought, hey, I'll have some recognizable faces. So I ended up going there, and was going to set up like pretty much a walk-on tryout, and Schmook had convinced me and talked to me about it and said, like, hey, you know what, man, it's a good route to go. And so I attempted that, and things went pretty well. And but I also was a knucklehead too, and I was a young, testosterone driven, immature kid at the time, and I didn't do so well in school at the time. So that led to me being removed from school rather quickly. And when that happened, it was like the whole world fell apart, and I wasn't doing anything anymore. And shortly thereafter, it was probably not even 6 months after I was out of school there, I started going back to school in Cleveland at, I think it was Tri-C. And one of my friends that was living in Europe, one of his best friends was an agent, and he's like, hey, he was asking me about guys. I told him about you. He's heard about you, and and here I am, like, I'm about 20 now, and he's like, what do you think? And I'm like, I was like, what do I think? I was like, let me call you back. I mean, he's calling me from Croatia, and I'm like, he was doing business out there and whatnot. So I'm like, I hang up the phone, and like that day, I literally, like, my hair was a little longer. I went to the barber. I got my hair cut. I know this sounds kind of crazy, and I went right to, I don't know if it was Dick's or Koenig's, and I got a brand new basketball, and I just started dribbling a basketball in my basement. It was winter time, and you know what? And I called my buddy a week later. I said, yeah, I'm in, and he's like, all right, here's the date. And I had about 6 months to prepare. So, like, literally, I just, I worked a job. I was a bartender and a server. I worked till like late in the evening, till like 1 in the morning. I would come home, I'd go in my basement, turn on my music, and I would dribble a ball for about, an hour, close my eyes, and then I'd work out a little bit. And every day, actually, I purchased Tim Grover's book. He was Michael Jordan's trainer. He wrote a book called Jump Attack. So I followed this book to a T, for like 12 weeks, and you took a week, 2 weeks off, and you did it for another 12. So I followed this thing to a T. My vertical went from like 31 to like 36 and a half. I was feeling good, and I was going to like every pickup game you could imagine, finding out different rec centers, whatever I could do to get prepared, and even like summer leagues, whatever I could do to join. And so here I am. I get to Europe finally, right? I did all my thing preparation wise, and I'm ready. I feel really good. My body's in great shape, and I have this try. I get there. I probably wasn't even there for 24 hours. I have a tryout. So it's in the summer. Not many guys are around, and they have a couple guys around. They're like, all right, we're gonna play 2-on-2 today. I said, cool. I've done 2-on-2. Like, we can do this. So we're playing 2-on-2. Things go well. I'm dribbling and trying to make moves and doing all this fancy stuff, right? Showing off my handle. And I don't think they were too impressed with the handle. They wanted to get, someone straight to the point, So that goes on for the full week. And then there's a continuation. Guys start coming back. And that week I meet up with a distant relative of mine. I found out I have like a third or fourth cousin that lives in Zagreb, where I was at in Yugoslavia, or Croatia now. And she'd like to have me over for dinner. So I go over there for dinner. She makes me this layout. I mean, it was awesome. We start with chicken noodle soup, and then she has all these Croatian dishes. And then, like, they just very salt, pepper, meat and potatoes. And then, like, you kill it with a great dessert. I mean, it was awesome. And so finally, like, I finish my meal, and I go home that night, And I don't know, it was probably like 8 or 9 o'clock, and I was just stuffed. I'm like, man, I got to go to bed. I'm like, I just can't even function. I was so full. I go to bed. I wake up at 2 in the morning, and my stomach is just like turning every which way. And I'm like, what the heck? And I end up going to the bathroom, and I'm throwing up. It's coming out. I mean, I end up like, it was bad. I don't know what hit me. The next morning, like, I had zero energy. I haven't eaten anything. I couldn't eat anything. Everything was out of me. I find out that I have food poisoning. The chicken noodle soup there was actual chicken in there, and it wasn't cooked all the way. So I got salmonella poisoning.
Oh.
Yeah. So here I am. I got my tryout that day, right? And I still got to go. I go. I'm like, I'm not missing this thing, right? And I show up. I mean, I have like zero energy, and one of their guys, the point guard. So we're playing pickup a little bit, and it's like 4-on-4 full court, and they're kind of taking it easy. I got to show my stuff, so I'm like, you know what? Like, this dude has a horrible handle. I'm just taking his ball. So I pick his pocket, and I'm going for the ball. He just jumps on my back. Yeah, like, just takes me out and like hits my head on the ground. Like, I'm not even paying attention. I get the ball, scoop it up, score. I come back, I'm ready to play, and they're like looking at me. They're like, man, this dude's like freaking nuts. I'm like, now all of a sudden my adrenaline's kicking in, and we're playing still, like going back and forth. And coach just stops practice. He's like, Cututric, come here. He's like, what is this? I got like blood going down my neck. I busted my chin on the ground. I didn't even realize. And they're like, like, you can't practice like this. So I had to go. Yeah, go figure. I'm like, I'm out of energy. You think like nothing could go wrong. I'm like, man, this is like, is this how it's supposed to be? So, I end up going home. I, get cleaned up, and I'm out. I can't keep anything. I could barely even drink a couple sips of water. I was out for like 2 weeks. I was about 185 pounds. In 2 weeks, I got down to about 160 pounds. Lost all my muscle that I gained. I was like, man, I was down and out, but I was still determined, to get back on it. So after I lost this weight, I finally got better, traveling a little bit. Mind you, I got better. I ended up going to Slovenia, and one of the ways to get rid of your upset stomach is to drink some of their homemade whiskey, because it kills any type of bacteria that's in there. So I had a couple shots of this stuff, and my stomach finally, this is one of my stories that I was
nice. I like it.
Yeah. So, so I have a couple shots, and my stomach finally started settling down. I still didn't eat barely anything at this time. And the next morning, I'm like, man, like, this is the best I've ever felt. And they're like, let's go get a burger. So we go to get a burger, and in Slovenia, they eat horse burgers. You're like, what? A horse burger? Like, you mean like cow, but out of a horse? They're like, yeah, they're delicious, man. I'm telling you. And I'm like, I don't know if that's good for my stomach, buddy. Like, you know what I mean?
I'm just coming off salmonella, man. Leave me alone.
Yeah, I'm like, I don't know if I should be eating this stuff. I was like, but my stomach does feel better, and I'm starving. I'm like, all right, let's do it. So I eat this horse burger. I'm like, just eating. I'm like, man, it was the best burger, Mike, that I've ever had in my whole life. Nothing has ever compared to this horse burger. They were huge.
The Secretariat burger?
You could pretty much say that. I mean, it was a monster. It looked like a half-pound burger, not even a quarter-pound burger. It was one of those big ones. I ate that thing, and you know what? We drove back home to Zagreb, man. I felt like a new man. I couldn't believe it. That horse burger, I held it down, didn't have to go to the bathroom or anything anymore. I knew I was on the mend. So, once we got back, I got back to my training regimen, and every day just got in the gym, working out, got a tryout with this team in northern Zagreb. It was called Karlovac, and literally started practicing with them all week. Had a horrible week of practice. They even had plays for me. I was like, man, I'm in a really good opportunity. And literally, like, everything is just like, my routine is off. I'm just not shooting the ball very well at all. Nothing. And nothing's falling. I'm just like, man, I'm like so disappointed. And finally we get to the game on Saturday. And I literally didn't play until like the last 4 minutes, 5 minutes of the game. Like I'm like on edge, right? Like I had taken some creatine, creatine gives you energy. I was ready. I'm like, this is my shot. Here I go. I'm like, and I didn't play. First half goes by, third quarter goes by. I'm like, what? Like I'm on the edge of my seat, like just going just ready to jump in, like sub myself in. Finally, they call my number at the 4 minute mark. And I'm like, obviously nerves are going. You're on edge. You're hyped up, like all that good stuff. We got a pretty good fan base. And I get out there and I'm just like, I just told myself, like, I'm just going to give 100%. Like I am not going to leave nothing to guess, like nothing. I'm not going to come out of this game wondering if I had any more energy left. Like there's no way. This is it. Like I've had way too much happen to me. And literally, like I come in there, I have a block shot. I make a couple good plays. I end up with like 8 points in like 4 minutes, a block, 3 rebounds. I get an and one. We ended up winning the game by 5. And I was like, man, like they were so pumped up. The team, like, gravitated towards me after the game and was really excited. And then that's when I got my first offer. So it was a pretty cool experience, where I thought, like, when you're put in an adverse situation where it's like do or die, that's pretty much what I felt like I was in. And it was a really cool opportunity to finally get that, to fruition, considering my past and how I got there and, the situation once I got there and with the sickness and whatnot and just busting my chin open and the horse burger and all that good stuff, man. It came to fruition that day. So it was a pretty big day, excitement for me. And that opened some doors and, allowed me to keep on traveling and playing for a couple teams.
Yeah, that's awesome. Although I have to say that had I been your teammate and traveled with you to purchase the Horseburger, your nickname would have been Horseburger. I will have you know that had I known that story about you, you would not have been Dennis anymore. You would have been known as Horseburger for you might be known as Horseburger now. You might start getting texts from me. Hey, Horseburger.
Listen, I just met you, Dennis. I'm calling you Horseburger. Just so you know. There you go.
It's about time, Jason. I've been waiting to hear from you.
I promise I've been here. I promise.
That's good. That's good stuff, Dennis. That is good stuff. So let's transition there and go to how you knew that you wanted to get into the basketball performance space. What kind of inspired you to choose that as your career path after you got done playing? And then maybe after you do that, then we'll wrap up. We're getting close to an hour and a half. Then maybe we'll wrap up with just some advice that you might have for young basketball players in terms of what they should be doing to improve their athletic performance. So let's start with just maybe the why behind how you got into what you got into, and then we'll jump into some advice that you might have for young basketball players.
All right. Well, after being there for a little bit, I ended up becoming a journeyman, going from one team to the next, to the next, to the next. Sometimes, some of these teams didn't even pay much at all. Like some of these players were only getting a couple $500 a month, and they were barely getting by. And then here I am, I'm coming in and, trying to make this team. And they're like, you're trying to take food off of the table for me. And there's a lot of little, situations that I came across that, I couldn't foresee firsthand.
For sure.
Until you go through that. And then you see like a lot of these clubs, these kids have been cadets, they call them. So it's like a feeder system. They start when they're 5 years old and they grow up through this team system, and they've been there with these friends for a long time. Well, I may be taking, one of their best friends' point guard's spot, and that's not always kosher with every team. But it did taught me to be a lot more mentally tough, meaning that you have to tune out the noise and block it out and just be there to do your job. So I did that and incurred some injuries. My ankles were really bad. A lot of, I twisted them and turned them and sprained them so many times that all the loose bone chips would get stuck in my joint. And, it caused me a lot of pain. And, I was just like, man, like I wish I had stronger ankles. I wish I could do something for this. And then my brother ends up, I was probably there for about a year and a half, 2 years. a little under 2 years actually. And my brother was getting married, so I just tried out for this team. I thought it was pretty good. They wanted to make more of a you could only play with like 2 foreigners on your team at a time. And then now it's a little different in Europe, but back then you could only have like 2 of them. And what they were doing is they were signing different foreign players from all over the place, and that was something new that they were trying, and they were willing to put this, like, I guess, supposed all-star team together. So I'm like, all right, I'm willing to do this. I have a really good week at this training camp, and then I go home for my brother's wedding. And then I'm talking to my agent, and he's like, you know what? They say they have this all-star team put together, but they don't have all-star money, Dennis. And I go, what do you mean? He goes, I know this team. He goes, they're not going to be able to pull out what they say they're going to pull out. And I'm like, well, I've been traveling. Like, I'm not going to come back for this. I go, what about something else? And he's like, I can look, and so he looked, and I go, listen, if there's nothing concrete, like, I don't want to go that route anymore. 2 years was enough for me at that point, especially with injuries, because I knew I couldn't be what I wanted to be. Because, like, for me, in order to be a good player, I felt I needed to jump and to be explosive in my first step, and I felt I was not able to do that while I was injured. So, I didn't hear from my agent. That happened, and my brother got married. I was in Ohio at the time. I'm like, you know what? I think I'm better off, like, just going back to school, because, like, I always knew if I wasn't doing basketball for a living, I had to find a job, and I had to do something with myself. And I knew I wanted to be around sports, specifically basketball, if I could make it. And I knew I wanted to go into, like, initially when I went to Bowling Green, my initial thought was physical therapy, and that's what I had signed up to do. And then when I got back from Croatia that many years later from playing, I knew that I wanted to do something similar, but I didn't want to work with rehab. I wanted to see on the performance side, because after being over there, some of the guys would come join me in the gym on some of these teams, and they have them take them through lifts or different workouts. And, I noticed I had a little sense in that, and guys would kind of attracted to it. So if I did that there, I just thought, like, how cool would that be to do it as a full-time job? So I started doing some research on the computer, found that there are a lot more performance coaches starting to come into the field, especially football was a big one. Basketball, not so much, only in the NBA. So I'm like, this is a great avenue for me to be involved in. And then I started meeting people. I went to college where I started out at Ohio State. I went to Ohio State for 2 years, and because I wanted to go to one of the best schools. And they had a great performance program. I met some really cool people down there, was willing to volunteer as, like, a nobody, started volunteering a little bit, exercise science club. I saw, like, how many paths they had and opportunities for the exercise science realm. And then I met my wife. She was living in Cleveland. So I moved to Cleveland, finished up at Cleveland State. They had a pretty good program, and volunteered there, finished up my undergrad there in exercise science in 2007. And then from there, I knew that the next step would be to find a grad assistant position. Well, prior to that, I was volunteering at Cleveland State with their basketball program and a couple other sports, and just, like, learning anything and everything I could. And then, I still had more free time. I was still a single guy, essentially, right? Like, we still have time when you don't have a family and you're not married. I reached out to an old high school coach of mine prior to Schmuck. We had this guy at West Geauga High School by the name of Cliff Hunt. Cliff Hunt ended up going to Perry. Then he ended up going to Lake Erie College and was a D3 head coach. And then they transitioned from D3 to D2. I hadn't spoken to him since I was a sophomore in high school. So literally almost like 8 years later, I sent him an email. And this guy, mind you, when I was in, like, middle school and high school, he was benching and squatting then. So he was a very important person in my life that was not only a mentor, but, like, hugely influential in that strength conditioning, because he would walk out like a proud pigeon, big chest, big shoulders, thick legs, and he could move. He would still play pickup with the guys, and he had a lot of success. So when I reached out to him, I asked him about it. Did you guys happen to have a strength coach? If not, this is what I'm doing. I know we haven't spoken in a long time, but this is what I remember about you. And he was like, sure, come on down. I came down and literally like he let me have at it, like literally trusted me 100%, gave me full autonomy to do whatever I wanted to do. And I was just like so immersed in that, I spent every waking hour thinking of what would be the best warm up to best lift to best recovery for what these guys were doing. And it was a pretty cool experience going in there. So that, along with Cleveland State, and then doing some other internships. I mean, I literally worked for free for a lot of people,
I'm sure.
But I took a internship. They only took one person at this Velocity Sports Performance facility, and they were like a chain that was just beginning, from a guy that was a world track sprinting coach, and he was just starting to open up on the East Coast. And I inquired there, met the managing supervisor for sports performance, and he's like, yeah, I don't know what we're going to do. We have so many applicants, I got over like 150 200 applicants, like, you're just another name, but like, I'll look at you again. So I would just email them every couple days, reach out, hey, have you come to decision? I would go down there, and finally I got a call a couple weeks, like 2 weeks later, and he's like, hey, just want to let you got the job if you want it. And I was like, heck yeah, I want it. And this guy was awesome. Sorry, excuse me. He just taught me so much about like directing and running the show of a strength conditioning program in a professional manner. And like, not only that, but like getting people's attention. They just taught me so much. And so I did that for 3 months, and at the end of my third month, we find out that the place is closing. They're going bankrupt. So I'm like, what do I do now? I thought I'm going to get a job there, right? I just graduated.
Right.
So this guy ends up going to another facility in Twinsburg, and he calls me over. He's like, want to come with me? I said, sure. So I worked there and for part-time, and then was looking at GA jobs, because I really knew that the best way in this field was to be a GA, rub elbows with some different kinds of coaches, and just learn, what the collegiate atmosphere and sector is all about. And so this guy that was my boss there that brought me over, he ends up moving again, and he goes to Utah, and he's working at the Velocity Sports Performance in Utah. And we keep in touch, and a month later, he gives me a call. He said, hey, I got someone from Utah State that came down here to visit, and he's looking for GAs. I know you were looking for one. You interested? I said, heck yeah, I'm interested, because they pay for your school and you get a little stipend. I mean, it's really a golden opportunity. And I go call this guy up. Kurt Schmidt was his name. He said, yeah, if you can give me a little more background information on you, give me some time. We're going to be hiring. And at this time, it was still a couple months away. He said, I'll keep in touch with you. I said, all right. So, but nothing's 100% guaranteed. Then I find out Kent State has a position. I'm like, I'm just trying to get anything, Mike, at this time. Like, I'm feasting. Like, I got to try. I got to do something, because like, I'm not going to let this slip out of my hands. I've invested way too much. So Kent State opens up, met this guy. He liked me a lot. He said, you know what? Like, I really like you. I like what you're saying. Like, you know what? Like, I'm going to bring you on. I go, really? I go, because if so, like, my mom literally lives like 5 miles down the street. Like, she just happened to live out that way. And I'm like, I could live with her for a little while until I figure out, apartment, but can I look for something? Would you recommend it? He's like, yeah. I'm like, awesome. I'm like, so I call Utah State. I said, hey, I just want to let you guys know, I'm probably not going to be accepting the position. He said, why not? I said, this is what's going on. He's like, well, just hang tight. So I'm like, sure. So I'm in my head, I'm thinking like Kent State. Like, that's all I'm thinking. I'm like, this is close to home. This is my calling. I couldn't ask for a better position. So the guy calls me up from Kent State, and he says, why don't you come on down for an interview? I said, sure. I come and I meet with all the coaches, AD. And at the end of the interview, the strength coach goes, hey, just so you know, you did a great job. We got a couple more candidates coming in, and we'll let you know next week who we're hiring. And I'm like, and I walk out, and he shook my hand. I'm like, wait a second. What do you mean? I'm thinking like, who you hiring? Like, it just caught me off guard.
Right.
After he shook my hand like a couple weeks prior and told me, hey, the job is yours. Well, I'm just beside myself, and I'm talking to my wife, or she was my girlfriend at the time, and she's like, how'd it go? I'm like, it didn't go so well, huh? And I'm like, really weird. I was like, guy told me I had it, and he just told me, she goes, she goes, you better call him back up. I go, yeah, you're right. I was like, I'm going to call him up. So I call him. He's not answering. I keep calling. He finally picks up. I said, hey, coach, what's up? I just want to talk to you because, like, I had another offer on the table, and, I don't want to throw that opportunity away because if this one's not going to happen. And he's like, well, we should find out on Wednesday. And that was like Friday, I think. And I said, well, I need to know now. I was like, he goes, well, he goes, just so you know, he goes, we're going to go with a different candidate. I go, why don't you just tell me? He goes, well, if it makes you feel any better, it happened to me once too. And I go, what? I go, you know what? I go, thanks for the interview and consideration. Best of luck. And I hung up the phone because I knew if I stayed on the phone any longer,
You're going to say something else, right?
Yeah, I probably would have gone to my side that I didn't want to go to. So that happened. I call Utah State. They're like, well, we got a couple other candidates, we're not sure what's going to happen. Well, that Kurt guy ends up leaving and he goes to another school and he passes my information to one of the GAs. And I'm like, oh, great. I'm like, now my odds are even slimmer. And I talked to this assistant and he's like, yeah, I heard what happened. We're not sure if you're all in. And I'm like, well, the only way I can be all in is like if the head strength coach pens a letter that says like, hey, Dennis, I promise, like once I offer the job to you, I'm not going to go back on it.
Right.
Right. And you know what I mean? I don't know any better. I just wanted some guarantee. And, my wife and I just got married at that time and she was going to come with me. And I'm like, I don't want to put us in a predicament like that. So we end up getting that letter. The head strength coach signs it and sends it to me. I'll never forget it. He's one of my best buddies to this time still keep in touch with Coach Jake. Offered me the position. I took it and I moved out to Utah, for $600 a month as a GA, working 75, 80 hours a week, going to school full time as a graduate student. End up getting my Master of Science in Health and Human Movement. Great experience. I never knew I would be around some awesome coaches that will go on to do bigger and better things. I got to cross paths and coach 3 NFL players. 2 of them became Super Bowl champions. That was like so cool to see. Like, never knew what this kid would become. And then now you see him in the NFL, with a Super Bowl trophy. So cool. So I was there for about a year and a half. And then when I got a phone call one day from Cleveland State, my old boss, and he says, hey, D, yeah, I got an assistant position open up here. Was wondering if, you want it. And I was like, what? I was like, really? I was like, I would love to do it. I go, but I've already promised my boss here, GAs are normally 2 years. That's how long it takes you to get your master's degree. So I go, can I have a couple of days? He's like, take the week. I don't need an answer right away, but you got all the time you need. I was like, thanks. So I contact my boss. I'm sitting there and I call him in the office and we're talking and he's like, man, it sounds like a pretty good offer. He's like, well, if it makes you feel any better, it might help you make a decision. He goes, I just got an offer to go back to Idaho, to my home state. And he goes, you have an opportunity to go back to your home state. He goes, I think it's a no-brainer. So he goes, I give you my blessing. You don't owe anything to the program. I was like, you sure? Like, cause I want to be a man of my word and at least honor what I said I was going to do. And he's like, if I'm you, he goes, you can never turn down a job that's in your hand. You're a GA, GAs come and go, but like when you get a job, you got to take that first job because you never know when it can come. So I took that, went to Cleveland State, and that was 2009. Our son, we had a son in the meantime. Gosh, he was about 3 months old. We thought it'd be a good idea to move back to Cleveland. We're there for about a year and a half. And I'm still looking for better opportunities because I wasn't a head strength coach. I just wanted to work with basketball, and my basketball time at Cleveland State was very minimal because, the head guy ran the show. I would assist, and I just saw like I could help in so many more ways. But, I don't want to do it without stepping on someone's toes. And that coach there, Coach Derek Millender, who now is with the Cavs, taught me so much about being humble and just having a cool MO, and being very forgiving. He was just so good with that, and I'll never forget that. I owe both of those strength coaches so much because they were both younger than me at the time, and I was like, I wanted to be in their shoes, and I never thought I could learn much from a younger guy, and I learned so much from those guys on a daily basis by how they carried themselves, how they treated me with respect all the time, and were professional. So luckily I had those two guys help me out, parlay that Cleveland State job into the Duquesne job. And I was at Duquesne for almost 8 full years working with specifically men's and women's basketball, my dream job. I can never forget, my first journal writing I wrote. I just was so grateful for my first opportunity to get my hands on these men's and women's basketball players of Division I. I was like, I'm finally here. And yeah, it was, I know I probably rambled on too much, but it was so awesome to finally get it in there. And the coaches I got to be around, I mean, some of them were Olympic champions. Some of them were on USA World teams, Pan Am. I mean, just so many different paths and people. And it was just a really fun but challenging experience, because that's when you really you had to work, and you worked. Everything you worked for came here, and you're still working like you were, but you were prepared for it, But now everything fell on your shoulders.
Absolutely. And I think your passion is your why. I mean, I think that comes through loud and clear, that you love what you do. You love the people that you've been able to work for, and the kids that you've been able to serve in the different capacities that you've had throughout your career. So let's wrap it up by give us 1 or 2 pieces of advice for a young basketball player, something that if you were to say, hey, focus on these 1 or 2 things, what are 1 or 2 of the most important things that a young basketball player could focus on from a performance standpoint, and then we'll jump back in and wrap things up.
From a performance standpoint, I would say they should really look at it a joint by joint approach. So really getting your ankle strong, really getting your knees strong, really getting your hips strong. And I want to say bands have been a huge, huge benefit when I started realizing how much better I can get with any type of resistance. Because in college you have all of these great things, equipment, high-tech this, high-tech GPS, heart rate monitoring, great machines. That's great, but it really comes down to just being able to handle your own body weight and just changing how you do that, from just holding, say, a squat hold for however long you can. How about just doing walking lunges, because that, from a joint by joint approach, works on your glute, your knee, and your ankle. Those are just some simple exercises that you don't have to have anything around. And then taking that, so from a slow approach or even a hold, and then incorporating it in a speed approach, so slowly going into that realm. And you can't get to the speed until you get to the strength. So I would say lunges, squats, good mornings, just when you do something, do it with your best deliberate intention. When you do it, it can be a lot of things, really. If you're grabbing a jump rope today, grab that jump rope and whir it around as fast as you can for 60 seconds. You'll get way more than doing it for 3 minutes, 10 minutes, because what are you trying to achieve from it? Yep. It's always getting your brain to think outside of it. For me, it's always about getting uncomfortable. You have to get uncomfortable. If you don't ever get uncomfortable, you're not going to be successful.
That's a great way to end it, Dennis. That's fantastic advice. Before we get out, give people a way to get in touch with you. How can they reach out if they listen to the podcast, they want to find out more about some of the things that you do, maybe get some advice from you from a performance standpoint? How do people reach out to you?
You can reach me email or cell phone. I mean, you have my phone number. I'm more than happy to answer my phone. That's not a problem at all. It's never bothering me. Anytime I can share information or just give someone an advantage, I'd love to do that and just talk shop. And then other ways, you can contact me at my email, my last name, Cuturic, Cuturic @rmu.edu. That's a great way to reach me, and I'll be sure to get in contact with anyone that reaches out.
Dennis, we can't thank you enough for spending an hour and a half or so with us tonight. It's been a pleasure to be able to go back and reminisce about some of the things we have in common. And then I learned some things about you tonight, Horseburger, that I had no idea prior to this. I had no idea we're part of your stories.
I didn't know about Horseburger either, so I'm excited.
It was a lot of fun. This was a lot of fun, Dennis. It really was. Hopefully you enjoyed it. And to everyone out there, thanks for listening, and we will catch you on our next episode. Thanks.
Registration is now open at headstartbasketball.com for this summer's Head Start basketball camps. We'll be hosting camps for boys and girls in grades 1 through 6 throughout the greater Cleveland area. Get registered today and make sure you hit the courts with us this summer.
Thanks for listening to the Hoop Heads podcast, presented by Head Start Basketball.